Hello and welcome to the Hacking State podcast. This is your host, Alex Mershak. With me today is Mark Wilcox. Mark Wilcox is the CEO and founder of 21E8, the magic number company. He's also famous for being sort of the introducer of 21E8 as a concept into the world. You did so on Twitter by highlighting this very strange hash that we're going to talk about momentarily. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Technically, I'm only one of a group of people who we introduced that around the same time. There's a few others floating around, but I
Ah,
did name. We have started a company up in New Zealand, and we're working on technology related to that. But it's already fairly decentralized. We have like a lot of people developing partnerships and other companies floating around. But yeah, we'll get into that.
yeah, that's a good point of clarification because I think some of the articles that I was reading about it, they sort of credit you with it very specifically, um, and you're still like very involved with sort of the whole, I guess, state of it, the movement on Twitter as well. So I think people sort of just
Hmm.
jump
Hmm.
automatically, but it's good to give the others credit. Um, so where to start? I guess before we get into what exactly you're doing with your company, we should give people a good understanding of what 21E8 is for those who are maybe not familiar with the concept. So could you just tell us a little bit about the discovery and what it what it means to you?
Sure. So like, what, 2017 or something was a very interesting year for Bitcoin, whereby you had all these kind of debates over what Bitcoin is or what it was potentially capable of, what it should become. It ended up forking. And I was working actually not on any Bitcoin blockchain stuff. I was working on sort of the HPC systems that are now, that after they've been engineered and developed up, have now being used to train these language models and things. But I was kind of interested in it, and kind of in and around the community with a bunch of other guys like Andrew DeSantis. And Andrew worked at the 21 company, which was the Andreessen Horowitz company, originally called 21E6. And 21E6 is the numerical notation for the number of Bitcoins.
Mm,
Um, I was kind of learning a lot, not just around like parallel computing and doing a lot of high dimensional data structures, but also dealing with like error correction, fault tolerance in data centers, and interestingly, data compression. At the company I worked at previously, we were involved in some really big radio astronomy projects that were using GPUs and doing really large scale compression to basically uh, make some of these massive AI style data problems that you see at the moment tractable, which they weren't on on. They're still really like this is still kind of only part way into it, but it's really still early. And I had a mate of mine, Andrew, who was he, like I said, he was working at the 21 company, and he was the guy who clued me in on all this like E8 maths,
mm,
which was really interesting. And I have a bad habit of buying dumb meme domains, and that was one of the ones that I had bought at the time. And then a year later, I was in out in Mississippi, and and we like to joke that we kind of like fell through a black hole, so to speak. We had been indexing our tweets into btc.slack.com Slack
mhm.
channel for about a year, and we kind of sat down to like clone the Twitter interface so that we could have and we'd been what we would do is we would tweet them, we would timestamp them onto the Bitcoin blockchain, and then we would delete all of them. So people could see all of that, they experienced it, but you couldn't recover it unless you had indexed it and archived it, and unless you knew how to go get that Merkle proof in order to reconstruct the graph again. And so that we were kind of putting the Bitcoin information market game theory dynamics onto the information market in a very like playful, fun, experimental way. But
Mm.
yeah, I was at in Mississippi with Andrew, and we were sitting there down to spend a couple of days on this project, and he tweeted the Genesis block, and then I went to blockchain.info, and in the top right of the it caught my eye in the top right. I saw that the block hash, the latest block hash said 21E8 in it, and I had 21e8.com in my Twitter profile with some fun WebGL graphics and things on it. Wasn't meant to be anything. But then Andrew is this kind of, he was you know how like Kanye West had his whole like Bitcoin Jesus is King transformation. A
Yeah.
lot of that character was kind of like discovered through Bitcoin. He was like tweeting decentralized and everything. Those were all kind of like crazy psycho cultural kind of art techniques that Andrew was pioneering on Twitter at the time. And so he's at DeSantis on Twitter,
Mm.
and which he doesn't have his access to his account anymore. But yeah, so I just we thought that was funny. I tweeted it. And he stayed up all night schizo posting about it, and then the next thing you knew was it was on all the news, and everybody was having like a you know like a religious event, almost like trying to understand what this hash meant. And interestingly, that was really the reaction to it was 100% what was interesting about it. Uh, Not any claim over like somebody produced this thing, but just the idea that there's something else to uh, like a checksum as almost like a media format, a highly compressed, extremely dense media format that caused this other reaction and things to take place above what you would typically see. Expect to just like run and secure the blockchain rationally. So everything we're actually working on at the moment comes from, whoa, what the hell happened there? And how do we make sense of it? And is there something that we can like tap into there to actually pretty much take the ideas that are there behind the like high dimensionality that we get with these lattice codings to
Mm.
actually go, hey, is there some other, like AI Bitcoin fusion architecture? And so everything we're working on at the moment, we've been working on basically 4 years now as a company, is around doing that. And I mentioned the forks. When I was first getting started and we didn't have like a clear idea of what the business would become, I basically just said, it's a high dimensional version of Bitcoin. It's the only way that you can carry forward the dynamics and the understanding and the strategy and planning of what Bitcoin was when it was a single network. Now that it's fragmented, you have to take into account a much wider information environment. You can't rely on, like, you can't trust the blockchain essentially, but you can trust the composite of them. And so that's basically the idea. We got stuck in New Zealand longer than we expected, and so we'll get into a little bit about what we're doing as a company. Um,
Mm.
but uh, but but basically, we call ourselves information architecture, which is kind of like a complement to computer architecture. Otherwise, yeah, I have to credit Andrew with making it famous, although I did post the tweet.
Yeah, excellent. So that was a really good backstory. And for those who maybe are less familiar with the actual like lore of this, I just wanted to clarify real quick the actual like content of the number. Why the number? Why the combination 21E8 is significant. So 21, refers to according to the story on this, the number of bitcoins, 21 million that are ever going to be produced. And then the E8 component comes from, I believe, Garrett Lisi's theory, right? That there's this sort of high dimensional superstructure known as E8 that might be the, I guess, base model representation of the universe out of which everything else gets projected. I think that's correct. Is that right?
That's pretty correct, but the thing is, it's what's called a magic number. So
Hmm.
there's all the fact that there are multiple other interpretations, and even in the
Mm.
context of the Bitcoin hash, where it's in a bigger hash, and you're reading the context, your meaning into that piece, that's actually the meaningful part in practice. So it's like whatever story you can tell around a number is what gives it meaning, which is what makes it interesting. So it's not just about the number itself, which was a regular, like the regular Bitcoin block difficulty,
Mm.
21E8, which was meaningful to me because I had the domain name, and I
Right,
and
right.
I was like, and Andrew and I were like, hey, these are cool concepts if you can put them together, right? They at the time, we were also telling a story about it was 21E8 and there were two extra zeros. And in the
Mm.
first ever Bitcoin block, in the Genesis block, which is also the thing that Andrew was tweeting at the time, so he was thinking about it. Um, the original block in Bitcoin was it was higher difficulty. It had more proof of work on it than was actually required by the original difficulty at the time. And so this is really where a lot of the interesting aspects comes into it, because it wasn't just like reading some weird number, but it was also
Mm.
this pattern, and then you could tell a story about putting an extra amount of work into it. Now, the other thing is that it's sort of like an immaculate conception kind of thing, in that Andrew's and I's experience of just stumbling across that when we just happened to be looking at the website. Like, we weren't there like scanning and waiting around until this number shows up to do some PR stunt or something. It was just completely incidental. The fact that it was that we had that direct experience first was like, we weren't experiencing somebody else trying to come up with some weird story. That was just us like, whoa, that was weird, right? And kind of experiencing a cool synchronicity, and having that fit in with like we're like media storytelling, music, games. I think like all software is like a art form, like a media form.
Mm.
We think on like the narrative lens first, and then like technology and architecture things like following through in that. And Andrew applies that a lot to like how he writes his code and builds his data structures and things as well. But yeah, so it was this extra difficulty which was really interesting, and that's actually again still relevant in terms of what we're talking what we're talking about in terms of what we're building as a company. Because if you think about Bitcoin, it needs to have a sustainable value that's above the block subsidy just to keep the network running. It actually has
Mm.
to have some intrinsic activity, otherwise it's not going to survive. And it needs to be tied towards improving and growing continuously that information architecture. And so that's where the E8 ideas come into it. But there are like, you could take a simpler, like a simpler explanation would just be that, okay, just imagine like a high dimensional Bitcoin, where like there's a conspiracy where there's actually more Bitcoins than there actually are.
Mm.
Everyone says there's 21 million Bitcoins. Well, what if you thought, and you just go, okay, I'm just going to put myself in a headspace where there's like 2.1 billion Bitcoins. Cool, what's that
Mm.
going to do? But the interesting thing is, and I come from like storage, transactions, like AI, probability, fault tolerance, erasure coding, all these kind of things. And what's really interesting at the base layer, when you look at mining in Bitcoin, the job that the miners are doing is resolving double spends. So when you pay a fee in Bitcoin, if you aren't double spending your Bitcoins, you're just giving money away for free, because the miners don't actually have to do any work. They maybe have to do a little tiny bit of work to mitigate their own risk, but they don't actually have to make a decision or choice over which transaction to include in, if they can kind of scam you into thinking that it's like illegal or fraud or something to have two transactions for one for one output
Mm,
go out to the network at the same time. But everything that we're architecting at the moment is to be able to create much higher levels of like hyper-dimensional context between miners, even at the individual node level. So think of it like opportunity cost. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter what the other miners are doing. They could just be like, you could be in totally cahoots with one another. But it's a bit like schizophrenia. Like the more you speculate over which way or that way or another, you end up like going a bit crazy if you over dedicate resources into it. So
mm,
we're trying to build this vision that has nothing to do with cryptocurrency. Actually, we ignore the token altogether. Like all of the Bitcoin kind of space was all confused with like it was all filled with confused people or companies that didn't know how to form like trustworthy business relationships. So we had to pull out of the Bitcoin like ecosystem altogether and just build our own technology from a much lower level to the ground up. So everything we're building doesn't have blockchain data structures fold into it, but it doesn't have any of those mechanisms in it really. But it's all there to basically create what we call a computational data market, which is
mm,
like a generalization of what is happening, whether it's a social network recommender system, whether it's a language model, or whether it's a proof of work blockchain, or whether it's things like file systems or object storage, or like a message queuing system in a data center, or actually how the internet works.
mm. So let's get into a little bit about what your company is doing. As you said, it's a computational data markets. You're trying to build these competitive systems that are melding together sort of content creation and distributed data exchange. And you said that what you're working on is a universal price system for digital information. What does that mean exactly?
It means the same idea as when you hit a like button in a social network and they have your advertising profile, and they use that advertising profile to determine whether your opinion is weighted higher or lower in terms of profitability and propagation, and encoding like and figuring out how that relates to all the other content and structures so that it can put similar content in the feed together. um, it's about doing that in the same way that Bitcoin achieves price discovery for the data and their token, but in a data centric form. So it's not some arbitrary token issuance database where you're tracking just the work in tokens, but you're actually
Mm,
using that as basically the currency. It's like a gold coin in an actual marketplace, like everything else that's actually valuable in the economy, and people actually need to eat and live and work and such in the information space. So out of all of the potential information that could either exist in the real world that you could go out and collect and mine, like you do when you find energy resources as a Bitcoin miner, or computationally, where you could find synthetic information or ideas or narrative or marketing or whatever to encode as a data product, which that could be a language model output, or it could be a NFT, basically looks the same thing to, or like just procedural generation of graphics. um, we kind of class this whole category as a computational data market. Now, I worked on when we were working on it, the kind of storage industry was trying to figure out like what do they name this kind of weird hybrid architecture of compute and storage. They
mhm,
landed on computational storage around like 2018, 2019. And so when I was getting the company started, that was kind of my way of like trying to explain like, okay, there's this thing called computational storage. People haven't quite figured out what to do with it yet. It's showing up now. It's in like the supercomputers and the DGX kind of architecture. It was shipped in the PS5 and the Xbox Series X in 2020, but there isn't any actual kind of user space software, file systems, APIs, programming models that are built around, well, okay, what happens when your hard drive can generate whatever files that it likes? And so what people are now, there's like a kind of buzzword marketing term for the content creation part, which is generative AI, but that's still
Mm,
very locked down into presuming that it all has to happen through this AI model, because the you have to kind of prompt the model in order to figure out how to like encode the context of the thing you want to generate. And we don't do that in quite the same way. I can't go too much into detail because we have a bunch of patents we're working on, but that's the general idea. And then so we're combining it with this like data exchange aspect, which currently we're kind of still on all of the old school legacy systems. So you may have a lot of like generative AI content, whether it's like generating text or you generating like 3D models.
mm,
Like actually they're not 3D model. They're like the radiance fields. They you can think it's like a light field. It's like a big huge volume of angles and high dimensionality that you can move around and you can see reflections of. They have to down res that back to a 3D model and import it into Unreal Engine, which is like really slow and unrealistic, in order to make it interactive and do networking and do all this other stuff. And it's the same thing for the content. If you think about like GPT, well, how do you like distribute and share and like get a reaction? You copy it into Microsoft Word or you copy it into Twitter or Facebook.
mm.
It's almost like the
Oh,
distributed data exchange piece. It's almost going to end up like a sort of like an open ad market,
mm.
or like if you come from a crypto space, like when they do DeFi liquidity mining, they're trying to pull everything together and make it fungible again.
Right, right. So sort of like kind of a protocol almost that you're creating.
It's a proto. You could think of it a protocol, not in the crypto sense, but in the actual network protocol sense.
Mm,
But it's very strange because it has this computational aspect to it, whereby you really have to think about it through. You have like the protocol has to be as wide and general and adaptive as possible, not rigid according to a specification with a consortium and things like Bluetooth. Um, but otherwise, yeah, it kind of encompasses those things too. So kind of same sort of like when people do WebRTC bridges and they try to like traverse over the network to be able to form connections between devices that they don't have actual like proper connections to each other. They just like plug them all full of adapters.
mm.
Same kind of thing here, but it's in this AI model, like information centric networking, like IPFS, BitTorrent, Bitcoin, these kind of systems, that kind of space.
And what's the promise of achieving this universal pricing system? What do you think is it going to fix in terms of the problems with the current digital economy?
Yeah, well, I was just tweeting this morning that AI has kind of caused a flip. So it used to be that the user's time was really valuable, like for advertisers, and people would be willing, and the advertisers could purchase that as a fungible commodity to put huge money into like millions and millions of eyeballs that could then cover the cost of delivering the entertainment product, essentially communication service of like getting you some messages,
Mm,
right? uh Attention is now no longer a front end phenomenon. They can like uh a lot of the economics and the money is changing as well, so the advertisers kind of like they don't have money, like the cost of running the social network communications part of it is going up, and the
mhm,
value of the information is going up, and the advertisers can no longer afford to run it. They have a lot of their own actual problems that they can't just keep on pouring money into like showing people ads that they never actually clicked.
Mhm.
We went through this whole 5-year period whereby the entire online advertising market was actually political manipulation and like misinformation warfare, as opposed to like buy my product, right? You could argue maybe it has been like that for much longer time, but right now it's come to the roost where AI has like the transformer models that were invented at Google have now
Mm.
disrupted Google as a result of Google engineers like building their models. So
Right.
everybody is finding that compute is money, data is money, bandwidth is money, electricity is money, but the US dollar, it kind of comes and goes. If the rates are one way, then it's money, and if the rates are another way, then it's not. Right? And the closer you are to that, the more you've kind of been burned in terms of like you're entirely swayed one way, you're entirely swayed the other, and you don't
Mm.
really have any good grounding. People outside the US, a US dollar is still money. So it gives people outside the US like a strange competitive advantage. They're just not as wealthy as folks are in America,
Right,
in
right.
a material sense. In a material sense, maybe I should say.
Yeah, and is there really is there a strong, I mean, I know you said that it's not really involved with the actual token per se, but is there a connection to Bitcoin in terms of the company that you're building?
There is, yeah, and I would say that the Bitcoin miners like they have immense pressure to find any scalable alternative to subsidies.
Mm.
Even if the price goes up and the subsidies continue, that doesn't guarantee that infrastructure they have in certain parts of the world is going to stay there. All of the mining infrastructure that was deployed in China got shut down pretty much. And
Yeah.
there's nothing stopping currently, after COVID, all the mining power went to the United States. There's nothing stopping a similar and there's like a lot of people in the States now who are like really keen and excited on get back industrial manufacturing and everything.
Right.
If they if companies like us can't be successful in capturing the value that they provide in a tangible form, then they will all collapse and go out of business and look like those, when the floods would come through in some place in China, and thousands of ASICs would just be there, going bust.
Yeah.
The Texas electrical grid is now entirely dependent on Bitcoin mining to be able to provide its backup power supply. And so
Yeah.
that is a very real thing, but they're tied to the Bitcoin economics. So we're working with a bunch of people around the place like that. Like most of our efforts are not like public. We like the meme because it keeps
Mm.
people entertained and it buys us time to like get our actual technology developed, get it safe, like work with these kind of big customers, and it's really difficult to get your head around and like pulling out of like the basically not just US dollar model, but Bitcoin to date in its entire operations has been purely speculation, like a means to get dollars based on
Mm.
like buy low and sell high or mine it, right?
Yeah.
And now everybody is grappling with what the hell do I do with all these dollars that got printed? Nvidia is now the example of a much better, they're the new like digital currency group because they just invested 1.3 billion into into an AI company, and then basically they're the only supplier of GPUs, and so they go, hey, say this is the price. Here you go. They basically just investing GPUs in companies now, right?
Mm.
Um, and so we don't see ourselves as having like we see Bitcoin as a small subset of the computational data market.
Right.
And once you can see that, and like most people in Bitcoin, they just like pretend like other cryptocurrencies, or pretend like Tesla Powerwalls, or pretend like other things don't exist, and they just purely focus on the rule, on the algorithm by which Bitcoin runs. But the fact you have multiple, they're lucky at the moment because there isn't a one, like none of the Bitcoin forks are
Mm.
meaningfully competitive. But if you had one of them even temporarily disrupt the main one, or you just had a bank run moment, Bitcoin is very vulnerable to that. And so a lot of our technologies and capabilities, they're all to go, is think of it like I was saying with this DeFi kind of aspect. The Bitcoins are really at the proof of work level now. In order to achieve stability and fault tolerance, in order to not be exposed to that kind of risk, you need to be able to account for the value. You don't necessarily need to process transactions, but you need to understand, like, you need to get a warning signal if some price fluctuations are going to happen. And in 2017, it was really, I think, like BCH was like $1,200 or something.
Mm.
There was a period when right after the fork happened where it was very tumultuous.
Right. So there's a problem with sort of the conceptualization, I guess, internally with the Bitcoin community. And then, I mean, there's multiple layers to this. One is like the perception, at least inside the US for most people, and definitely outside the US as well, of Bitcoin as like a dollar like derivative almost. Um, and really the ultimate goal is to sort of flip the entire thing around, right? And so and the flippening, so it's called, is it seems to be happening a little bit, but people are still sort
I,
of
I, I would say
evaluating
that
it.
it happened, like AI is the new Bitcoin, right? Like what
Mm,
happened was you had a bunch of these GPUs that were on Ethereum. Now
yeah.
they went to some other, like now all of the money, like Nvidia is not entering, they're not competing with Bitmain. Like Bitcoin is dead as a competitive computational market,
Mm,
but it is still a massive systemic risk because it continues to be around and prop everything up, right? It is
mm,
actually really robust and decentralized and trustworthy. So there's a huge amount of other kind of risk and other computational market stuff that's sitting on top of that, because it's at least safer to do like a blue sky Noster thing
mm.
than like running Twitter on Google Cloud, right? Like Elon just
Right,
is like, it's not going to pay my bill. We're introducing rate limits today because our Google Cloud agreement expired yesterday. You get 600 tweets, right? Like that's his
right.
risk management strategy. Uh, Currently, there's a huge amount of money that was printed in 2020 that is still propping up Microsoft and Google and OpenAI and everybody, but it's not it's basically VC money, right?
Right.
It's not going to be
Yeah.
around there forever. And like, yeah, they'll, if they can't solve their systemic risk or whatever issues, more money will be printed, but that will just perpetuate the problem, right? Um, uh, yeah, so it's not
Yeah.
about like flippening of something or another, and the fact that Bitcoin is no longer a competitive market, like there aren't up until the halvening, people were making really crazy ASICs and competing with whatever little thing they could squeeze out.
Mm,
That all kind of blew up after it wasn't like, the big blockers and the small blockers really aggressively hating each other and competing over the one network. When they just
mm,
had their own networks and they're like, oh cool, you have a good time, you have a good time. Um, there's no competition anymore, right? And so what you found, like a lot of even though like a lot of interest, like BTC went up in massive value and compute in terms of security as like a stable asset, and a lot of these other networks, they did some crazy cool engineering of like different applications you could build. People delivered on like the utility value, but unless you could have those two things plugged together, then you don't have a single decentralized market anymore. It got included into the logics of like the US dollar market, where it likes to
right.
have lots of little monopolies. And so BTC or BSV or BCH or Ethereum or Solana, it doesn't matter. For all
Mm,
intents and practices, they're exactly the same as a Tesla stock, right? Or Apple stock or whatever. And
yeah.
if you think about, okay, what's the best investment over the last few years? If you cared about withstanding inflation, you probably should have bought Nvidia stock,
Mm, right.
right? because Nvidia stock is the new Bitcoin.
Okay, so you're saying there's sort of this disjoint between the sort of financial market on one side and then the actual underlying substrate of all of these technologies, which is compute, data, etc. And this this causes a problem because there's sort of an inherent um, mixing of signals or lack of signaling both ways. When really the financial component of all these projects is sitting on top of this underlying data market, or maybe it's more, I guess, a computational market. Yeah, would be the best way to put it.
Nobody
Um,
knows what the US dollar is worth
yeah.
except for Bitcoin. Bitcoin prices US dollars in a global market.
Hmm.
If you know what a fair price for a US dollar is, then you can trade it. And so everything we're doing is at a macro level about finding price discovery back onto compute by using the much broader information market, financial market, whatever. And the entire global financial system is already a computational market. It's just not anchored on anything. It's like fiat, it's fake. So what happens is that more and more capital goes into BlackRock Aladdin, where they run the ESG algorithms
Hmm.
to like just determine at the policy level how they stabilize like the socio-cultural like compliance to manage risk in the economy and like in the society. And they're dependent on the currency and capitalism market stuff to be able to have some liquidity. But it's also this backwards compatible thing that's now run by computer systems, right? And so when you think about 2008, that was a failure to predict risk that was in a derivative. But in 2004, the essentially the difficulty level of computing computational derivatives went up a lot because the Intel CPU stopped scaling and it went multi-core. And in
Hmm.
2006, 2007, 2008, you had NVIDIA coming out with general purpose programmable GPUs. You had a lot of people doing work with FPGAs. And it's the same thing that ended up that you saw in Bitcoin with people optimizing the compute on the mining side. It was just all the high frequency trader Wall Street kind of guys like I forget her name, like literally one of the biggest executives in the crypto space was the inventor of the CDO, the collateralized debt obligation that crashed
Yeah.
the whole financial market. And so tokens and all these other things, they're all like, now you have AI come out in like 2012, 2013. And a few years later, the whole economy blows up again in 2020, right? So we are in for a long time. We're already in this market. What we don't have is an understanding or a consensus or any measure by which people can agree upon or negotiate how to load balance risk from high complexity general purpose computational derivatives and pricing and advertising information, etc., onto real physical critical infrastructure and electricity and like farming and everything. And after the failure of actual of things like Bitcoin to be able to resolve that at the geo-economic level, like you previously had Russia and China and the United States in hyper competition between each other, right?
Hmm.
Now basically everybody's like, okay, we're just going to go back to war.
Right. Right. So, do you think that some sort of breakthrough in processing power would help this, or is it really just that the systems have not been properly reconfigured to
The
to
the
work within
processing
this
power
new
is
paradigm?
not the problem. The processing power is incredible. The processing power is like that's like the war machine behind the US dollar that's propping it up. All of the
Mm.
value in the Western world is from like the US military industrial complex,
Right.
right? So the problem to solve is how much compute it takes to generate value,
Mm.
right? And if you think about what is actually happening, like Bitcoin hasn't disappeared. It's just a much stranger, more distributed, harder to figure out how to crack open. We're we're trying to generalize that, so it doesn't matter. You like make it all accessible again, so you can do anything, and that's why we can do crazy things on the internet because we understand the value, right?
Mm.
What was happening was that all of the inefficiencies in the way that we have built computers for decades were being ripped out and replaced with like ASIC companies that got started up in 18 months and just like uh, they just self-funded their way to market off of their mining proceeds, right?
Mm.
The same we want the same thing to be possible for software and information, so that the amount of computational work you have to do to get useful results out doesn't keep on exploding. Because now, right now, you may think that like, wow, chat GPT is the most amazing thing ever. It's actually the crappiest 1980s like terminal. It's like slower than an IBM terminal, like Apple One user experience. Like it can't even calculate numbers correctly. But the amount of electricity and the amount of engineering that has to go into chat GPT to figure out how to write all the letters out to give you your prompt answer is just astronomical. But the whole economy has to be filtered through that, because that technology and the compute and the capability and the AI algorithms are what are out there doing all the real work for people, like self-driving the taxis around and such, because everybody kind of like spent they got psyops by the internet. So they spent their
Mm.
entire childhood and training like typing things on a computer and like playing virtual like like they have like the farming simulator game. Like
Right.
maybe
Right.
you could have a real farm, right? And you could earn money from
Right.
that. And it would be like
Yeah.
amazingly traced, God-given computer graphics.
Right. Right. Yeah. I just did the last interview we did was with a homesteader, and the homesteading movement's growing quite a lot. But you can get back into the analog world if you want. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Well, but that's like the real metaverse. Basically, is this is the crazy cybernetic thing the transformation that's happening. Is
mm.
AI is destroying people's belief in the computer, because the computer is now learning and understanding that there's a whole other world out there of things that are real and tangible and that aren't easily manipulatable. You can't compute your way around gender out in physics.
Right. So I mean, well, I guess maybe you can get robotics to a point where where it can start to manipulate many things in the physical world. But I mean, to me, it seems like
But
mostly it's
in
an issue
reality,
of
though, like
dexterity.
the industrial revolution is currently going backwards. All of
Hmm.
our compute and all of our engineering capability is going into trying to figure out how to get like the nursing home that like
Right.
lady like we are crap, we're out of immigrants, so maybe Elon, can you like manufacture us some more humanoid looking people that can come around and take care of people? Like uh, the industrial revolution happened a long time ago.
Hmm.
All of our current issues, all of that infrastructure that we still rely on to be able to like you know uh, order things off Amazon is collapsing. And so mostly what's happening in the economy is identifying what is the actual critical infrastructure things that we have to put our very scarce resources and people into, from almost like the government level. And
Yeah.
there's like a lot of international collaboration because it's a global problem, to be able to figure out, okay, at least we need to get water and electricity and like food and everything to people. If they can do
Mhm.
that, nobody needs any video games. Don't worry, they're not going to have any time. They're going to be panicking and trying to figure out how they find some water, right?
Right.
But unfortunately, all of the systems that created that problem are still around on this like virtual reality that I call America. Now, America lives in like this metaphysical place where everything is backwards and nonsense because you have
Yeah, yeah.
the capacity to rationalize and overthink and argue, and
Mhm.
then outsource it all to somewhere else, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things that's been remarked upon and probably is gonna be increasingly a problem in the future is, uh, we spend more time in the virtual world and then don't notice that the physical world around us is degrading. And then creates a feedback loop where you wanna spend more and more time not in the physical world because your surroundings are terrible. And so as long as you're comfortable enough in the digital space, you will just people will continue to overinvest in that. Um, then the other thing, I guess, the other issue with just like maintenance in general of like crucial infrastructure is that it doesn't produce a high return, right? And so if you're 100% focused on, or at least it doesn't produce a
When
high,
measured in US dollars, when you believe in US dollars, that's correct. When
right?
you are not scammed, when you believe that compute is money and and then you go, okay, how are the supply chains and what's the this and what's that and all the prices are going to change if this thing happens or that thing happens.
Hmm.
The whole it's like Wizard of Oz. You see like the
Yeah.
dude messing with the things behind the scenes and like instead of being scared of this huge big brother like US government thing, it's like like Biden is like an old geriatric dude. Like, why would anybody put any effort into being paranoid, schizophrenic over like the US government, where they literally just like have a like a non-president, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So
So,
people are still what I meant before,
mhm.
where that this whole system and world is still around, is that people are still doubling down on this like digital virtual I'm going to work on my computer thing, but they're scamming themselves out of like the life they could be having because they're still thinking I need to make X million dollars in order to retire to the countryside where I can live a nice little like life and have a family and get kids because they can't just admit that they have to do work. So they have to somehow get a bunch of money so that they can retire to the countryside, but still be able to pay other Amazon delivery drivers to like bring all their stuff. And they're trapped in that like doing they're trapped in this literal like how I was talking about the Amazon delivery drivers before. They're trapped in that shrinking economy. But this technology that's out there that's growing enormously, it's not like it's gotten worse since the 90s. It's phenomenal in terms of what you can do with it, but it is
Mhm.
really difficult to program and control and can do everything with because the way that the systems are architected at like a communication programming level, like they don't scale to a big company. So big companies, they are just dedicated to continuing to hold on to whatever they've had. Like Intel are just completely incapable of improving their like silicon density and the transistor density anymore. Everyone's like
Mhm.
Moore's law is over, but people are still making big improvements in in the chip density, but they can only do it in small teams, right? And so what we are lacking is this like what Bitcoin does at an economic level. We need that at a socio-cultural level to be able to reduce the actual cost of communication, right? Around all these different aspects. And the social networks were doing it for a while because they were making everything amazing and open. And then
Mhm.
as soon as kind of Facebook and things realized how much money everybody was making off of their platforms, they charged businesses to be able to post their own audiences on their page. And the whether it's Bitcoin or Urbit or our stuff, like or actually a lot of the things that like Elon's trying to push Twitter towards as well.
Yeah.
Um, who it doesn't matter whichever if any of the whichever of the technologies are successful, the whole drive and the whole prospect of all those technologies is to make it like this is like the original idea of Bitcoin, right? Peer-to-peer payment between a consumer and a merchant.
Hmm.
But the entire existing economy is dependent on that intermediate relationship to be able to hold up all the existing capabilities. If Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, whoever, like community people, were actually using those technologies and tokens to sell real goods and products and reduce that risk, then we would have a huge market. But they're not. They're just still scamming people off like monkey pictures,
Right, right.
right?
Yeah. So, I mean, well, you were speaking about the prospect of like misinvestment or disinvestment in like the existing important systems reminded me of something that happened, I think, a month ago. There's one day that I was working and Amazon US East 1 went down, like the whole thing, because there was some sort of problem in the main data center. And the whole internet was like freaking out about this. I made some tweets about it. And it was like a moment of realization where it's like, oh, you don't understand that so much of like the modern economy actually completely functions off of this one choke point, or a handful of choke points. And let's just say the power, like there's a power grid failure on the east coast of the United States. I remember when I was a kid, there was one that happened that wiped out a huge chunk of the east coast, like New York and New England. And it was out for like several days. If that happened today, huge chunks of the economy would be extremely, like, extraordinarily disrupted. I mean, I'm sure that Amazon has certain backup systems and they could move things elsewhere, but um, it's something that people aren't really considering. We're building really fragile systems.
Yeah, in 2020, it used to be that nobody paid any interest in New Zealand as a market. In 2020 and 2021, every single one of the big tech firms came to New Zealand and started hyperscale data center projects
And what's that for?
for
Isolating
continuing to
from
run it. They're
risk.
basically like running out of, they don't, in the US, they're not convinced that they can continue to run and keep things stable.
Hmm.
Like they have too much organization. Like America is very large. So whenever you have any little problem, the market exploits the existence of that problem to be able to get as many dollars and make it as big of a potential problem as possible. Like a lot of these companies, they have to go to smaller regions in order to provide that resilience and make their organization like tractable. It was similar, like New Zealand and everybody started up space agencies around 2016, 2017, when that was when Rocket Lab was getting started here.
Mm.
And so a lot of the things that we're doing is, and I've had a lot of direct exposure to it, in the market, and a lot of crypto people, they get paranoid over like big tech, thinking that they're big and scary and monopolize. They're actually, we need so much from those companies, but they struggle so much to deliver because of their size and because they basically print money. So they don't have, money isn't real to them. So
Mm.
it's extra difficult to actually solve any of these problems. That's why they hire up everyone. They pay like a huge price because they value your time and ingenuity and like engineering expertise, and they want to form teams. They just don't know how to do it, and they're already drowning in problems. Everybody, very few people have had exposure at the very low level of how the data centers are run, how the economics work, how all the supply chains function, how the teams are organized, and how they do their testing and merge it in, how they measure all their fault tolerance and things like that. Very few people have been exposed to that, and there isn't time to train up new people. The fires need to be put out now, right? And that's the real reason that so much effort is being put into artificial intelligence, is because even though the cost is exploding and the UX of all like computers, like the software is terrible compared to what it used to be, it's still much, 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 much faster than trying to train up a person and put them on the team. And like AI model, although they put like AI safety stuff in it for like the public,
Mhm.
It doesn't have any political, it's not confused about its gender. It's like, I'm an AI model trained by OpenAI. Tell me what you want me to do,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's like really nice and robotic. Like they've solved the white collar robotics problem, right?
Right,
Because they can
right.
actually just type things in and get things done and code comes out. It's amazing.
Mhm.
It's not quite developed up at the moment, and that's creating other sorts of risk. But those are all nicely, they're all technology problems that actually like the AI stuff is fairly self improving now. But yeah, so we need companies, and a lot of our effort has been purely only focused on this problem, which is how do you use this technology to run an organization? Because to date, every single startup, once you go over 30 people, you have communication breakdown as a result of the CPU processor architecture, right? So like as soon as there's still this complexity, you need some structure and way of organizing. And the only means of structure and organizing that is available to, allocate resources and assign permissions and everything has been tree structures and CPUs and RAM in the cloud, right? And
Mhm.
we went through this initial like Kubernetes virtualization thing where you can make it like a really big, even slower CPU that has tons of
Right.
RAM. But the recommender systems were the first instance of this AI stuff, solving that big dimensionality problem and finding ways to connect people and coordinate people without going directly through. Bitcoin is also one of those where it could do distributed resource allocation. The problem is that everybody just put CPU code and tree structures and like token issuances on top, and then just sucked up all of that extra capacity that was created. So all of our effort is among, we need to be able to create companies that are in the range of 30 to 1,000 people again. And we need thousands of them to exist by the end of the decade. Otherwise, like you're just going to be otherwise we're going to have a lot of competition over homesteads. Like you think the housing prices are going to go up
Right.
like real nice if the city doesn't function anymore, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's sort of like tyranny of scale that's happening, um, where you need the middle-sized companies to be viable again, and they're not because of macroeconomic reasons at the
it's
moment.
called the curse of dimensionality.
Mhm.
And so the more you have this like fiat computational derivatives way of creating value that doesn't
Mhm.
have a countermeasure, it doesn't have any way to balance it out, you get more and more crazy speculative monkey picture like ways, high complexity ways of competing over value. And there needs to be much simpler, easier, resource efficient ways to go from A to B. Like instead of having a whole Uber driver scam, like crazy VC fueled bubble thing, you could just like own your car. Like instead of having self-driving cars so that you can look at ads to pay for the technology stuff so that
Mhm.
you can get from, just make a car without any computer in it with an engine and a steering wheel and like some airbags probably, and like drive yourself over there and like leave your car and then own it and drive it back and take care of it. So we don't, all this intermediate stuff has destroyed property ownership. Like people
Right.
call it, they've now this is the if people complain about capitalism because it was like the capitalist system became this.
Right.
But if you look at the definition of capitalism and you look at what we're doing, it's not capitalism, right? It's a weird computational socialism.
Mhm.
And capitalism is actually very simple. It's like, oh, I like buy assets, and they like, if I buy the right assets and I take care of them and they go well together, then like you buy a bunch of little things you put in your house and a couch and car and stuff. And you have a family, you take care of it, make a nice garden. Somebody will pay a big premium if they like need a whole house like right now, ready to go with all of the things in it,
Yeah.
right? Amount of
Right.
work and investment and like emotional kind of and like decisions, human decisions that go into that. That's what profit is. Like that's what people are paying for at the end of the day.
Mhm. Yeah, so value added, basically. Um, yeah, so I wanted to uh, ask you a few more questions before we wrap up here. Um, One of the things that I noticed on the 21E8 website, which is ever at 21e8.com, is this countdown timer, uh, which is very, ominous and mysterious. And it looks like someone driving in a car going somewhere. What is this countdown about?
It's a good question. If you go to 21e8.nz, that's the other website, and that talks
Yeah.
about what we do. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. So we'll leave that as a mystery for the viewer to maybe find out about later. Um,
Maybe we haven't
and
even
then
decided what to do there yet, We'll see.
right,
The
right.
time
Well, I mean,
era.
this is what I like about 21E8. There's so much mystery involved in it, and I think there needs to be a little bit of mysteriousness re-injected into the world because, again, a lot of the problems that we're talking about, um, you could say, are the result of very like contingent historical forces or economic forces, but they're also partially a result of like a lack of curiosity. Like people are just not asking enough questions about why the system isn't working or whether it could be totally different. Um, when you remarked,
One of the
go ahead.
interesting things about Bitcoin is
Hmm.
that it is at its core a clock, but it's also a countdown timer because it
Mm.
has an issuance curve. And that has
Yeah.
certain like psycho-cultural effects. It also has an interesting information market, high uncertainty, strategic kind of environment thing that emerges from that. There's a concept called so all of these AI kind of big centralized companies, they operate on what's called decision theory, which is the
Mm.
active inference equivalent of game theory. It's not game
Yeah.
theory to understand the environment and like how some mechanisms and actors are going to behave, but it's the act of like, okay, but if you're actually a participant in that system, how should you act? And most decision theory is like most game theory based on zero sum games, like based on von Neumann game theory. And Bitcoin is based on Nash equilibrium, high uncertainty, high dimensional game theory, whereby the way what's that quote, like the best way to predict the future is to create it. Like
Mm.
the lowest risk way to really actually kind of manage your risk, know things for sure, have high certainty, is to make decisions that actively improve your information awareness, improve your decision making capability. It's like if you don't know what to invest your money in, then like just invest it in the stock market and wait a bit and get more money, or invest in Bitcoin, wait a bit and resist inflation.
Mm.
But there are actual things to do to create value that that when you recognize them, it's really, really important. You recognize that and you go after it. Bitcoin used to be there because it used to be a very weird, strange little thing. Now it's established out and it's an easy, safe bet. It's like investing in Apple or Microsoft or Nvidia.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's a concept called information gap decision theory, which is decision theory uh, in high uncertainty environments. And so everything we try to make sure of is to maximize our optionality, to also minimize getting classified and getting getting pushed into a certain domain by these existing information systems. We have, because we use our own technology and we're building our company off of that, we have an incentive almost to create to satisfy consumer entertainment demand, which is what most venture capital and everything is actually. Startups is like a cool entertainment. Look at the cool technology and then think about it and buy it. Like SpaceX, for example, and Tesla are both entertainment companies because they need consumer buy-in they need to watch the live stream, they need to like stare at the 3D render and go, wow, that's cool, and
Mm.
buy Tesla stock, and then they use the multiple on the Tesla stock to, take 4 years or 5 years or whatever it is to deliver the Cybertruck, right? And
Right.
that's a critical like economic function at this point. We exist in the same market, and like the idea itself, it's like I was the closest, like the first to be subjected to the phenomenon, but I had exposure also to a lot of the technologies and capabilities, and I come from like a media games kind of background originally, and
Mm.
so that was really interesting to me. But then when I kind of like folded in all this other understanding that we were thinking about in where it was in Bitcoin or where it was in AI stuff, or the interplay, the years before that, it was like the natural thing to do when you don't actually know what the company is or what it's going to become or what the right path to market is, but this is like the thing that we need to hone in on and explore. It's almost like a self-naming phenomenon. So everything we do is almost like dual. We have our actual technologies that are very high risk, very difficult, very unproven because they're non-traditional. And we need to be able to kind of like do that in as small like, we don't want hype over the technology is the way I want to say it. But
Mm.
there's this immense infinite demand like that Bitcoin like represents, at least in at least some form of idea of this like crypto energy data market. There's like, it's sitting and waiting to be spent on whatever utility something's going to happen. And a lot of these other altcoins, like they would also, they would do that more directly. They would have some other little thing over here. It's like, hey, maybe here's some other technology that doesn't exist. Come over and spend all the time that you're just looking at the price. Look at these cool monkey pictures and play this game and do whatever, right? And so then they would monetize that hype. But the problem is that most of those projects, like early on, even Ethereum, even though like I'm a big critic of Ethereum, but Ethereum has done a lot more actual like technology, real value development than
Yeah.
every other successive altcoin that has come after, because
Right.
people really like they just ended up um, getting used to the fact that it was just pure entertainment value, right? So we
Mm.
have a need to satisfy and to get attention and awareness and like all of that kind of stuff to be able to have a computing business in the future. We need to be able to have awareness. But the other thing is, which is really interesting, is that the more awareness there is of the idea, completely separate from all the things that we plan to do as a company,
Yeah.
actually, the more people have the same experience where they have to figure out, that they have to think hard about it, learn what these things are, do their research, and come to these insights without anyone like selling them some scam coin thing in the middle, right? And so we really like the fact that at least if we can take up that market share in the like entertainment space,
Yeah.
introduce people to the ideas, then we can
Mm.
make sure that somebody else isn't sitting there and filling it in, right? So the way to think about it is, if we weren't in there would be another Ethereum, Solana, other kind of like altcoin thing that would have been putting a token into it and it continuing to extend out this process that has happened for years at this point. So the way
Mm.
to think about it is almost like I have been saying that because like we really struggled in 2019 when we were starting things up. We're like, don't look at the company name, like don't think about that. But we're out there like explaining to everybody, like, you got to stop with these SaaS companies. It's not sustainable. You need to be working on like solving real problems. Like, all this is crazy. Everybody stopped caring. Like, nobody believes in SaaS companies anymore. Cloud is dead. Now they're all trying to figure out HPC AI stuff. It's really interesting. But the thing that was really fascinating
Mm.
was how, and Twitter now is also an example of this, but Square added a dimension. They became block. Facebook became an infinity meta symbol thing,
Right.
right? Now
Right.
Twitter is becoming the X corporation.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody's still mad about us because we're like some weird company, but everybody is, for some reason, they're like used to they've just accepted. Facebook decided he wants to be an infinity symbol. Nobody is
Mm,
sitting there screaming, knocking down his. Actually, he did a really good job of his like 90-minute long like animation movie to go like, this is my vision for the metaverse.
mm,
It's completely impractical and he's like trying to pretend it didn't happen. But I think that like everything we're doing is exactly the same phenomenon where we basically recognize, hey, this old like flat Bitcoin symbol thing of like send something back and forth that was cool in 2009, um, it kind of needs to be updated for the computer architecture that it's about to run through. And yeah, it's going to be strange and weird, and we're going to add some dimensions, like we're like an 8-dimensional orb thing. Um,
right. With
but
a with the cube in
but
the middle.
look at all these other companies. We're actually just in the same market as them, and the entertain like the people who would previously be playing like huge big photorealistic crisis video games where they get all this cool entertainment. Now they're having to just like sit and scroll on TikTok videos. So
Mm,
like we're trying to go. Here's some cool like shiny or hyperdimensional, and like the NFTs, like we're doing the same kind of thing. They were selling people tokens with like ray tracing attached to it, right?
yeah.
That's what people really want. And they want, like you were saying, they want the intrigue and they want the mystery. But we're kind of looking at that at a very serious, like measurable, big market problem. And it cuts straight into how the actual computer architecture is functioning. And we need to maximize uncertainty in order to basically rate limit the complexity. We need to be able to force the market to deal with an information overload problem, because otherwise it's going to keep on generating this complexity, flooding people with confusing made up backward symbols. And we
Mm,
need to move back to a world in which we can, okay, maybe you're not going to be able to trust information and news and like stories and everything for a while and pictures, but like, okay, maybe we start at the hash function. Maybe we start at the like Bitcoin script. Maybe we start at like Urbit knock instruction set, like basic mathematics.
mm.
Maybe we have to go like we have to get as far away from the computer, like have a physical office again, take the devices off of people. You can trust each other, they sit in front of you, you can trust your daily experience. We need to move back to these base primitives whereby people can have like be in reality and not be in like crazy psycho metaverse culture war. Once you have those frameworks, whether it is like the knock kind of level that like the Zorp guys are doing, or whether it's from like the cultural level, which is what we're trying to do in New Zealand. Right, New
Mm.
Zealand's a very small society, so we don't just get this like in our own company, but like things that are entire companies or departments in the United States are just one person here, and you just call them up and have a coffee with them. Whether it's either of those directions, you need some sort of grounding to be able to form trust between people and form the same like mental model and understanding to be able to make any long-term plans, come to consensus over anything, build anything that's more complex than like one or a very small team of people can create. Okay.
Wow. I'm so glad we did this interview because I've learned so much in our short time, and I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of this. Yeah, it's really a total paradigm shift in more than one way. One thing I want to just ask before we head out, like one last question, is what is it that you believe that is sort of the most succinct takeaway um, from 21E8, the company, the movement overall, for people to keep in the back of their minds as they're going forward?
We're like AI plus Urbit plus Bitcoin maximalist mindset people.
Mm,
So we do a weird, strange hybrid of like you need to control your own keys and you need to host your own software and you need to like build out industrials. You need to like whenever there's an opportunity, you need to ape into it as big as possible to maximize the return on investment kind of thing. Go We don't know for how much longer you're going to be able to buy the state-of-the-art chips that you can program yourself that can have these capabilities. Uh, Take at least 10% of your Bitcoin holdings, go to the Apple website and buy Mac Minis and stack them up, whether it's your home or like scattered across your friends or whatever. Computers are money, but you need physical access and physical control over them, and they need to be extremely low power, and they need to be highly fungible and easy to use. There's some parts of the world that they may become, like Apple computers, may become the most fungible, but you could be putting $3,500 into like one M2 chip with a flashy weird headset display attached to it, or you could be buying them for $699 over the Apple website, right?
Mm.
Today. So that's kind of the thing. We like to meme the Mac Mini thing because it's very accessible. It's not actually in conflict with all of this existing complex. It's actually still helping it, like everybody, all of the cloud is dependent on Apple computers, iPhones, MacBooks to be able to
Mhm.
scroll and look at ads and things and distribute you the information as a result of those systems. Um, right? And Apple Silicon basically is money. I used to say this with the GPUs. Now everybody is also treating the GPUs like that. Um, the next thing is not like finding access to some H200 or H100 or somewhere off in some cloud data center so that you can profit off of like some temporary AI bubble. Um, Go de-risk your exposure to collective communication, collective computational systems. Get a bunch of other computers that you can stack up in your garage that are the most fungible. You want them to be small and simple and lightweight and really versatile, and they have the best security in them out of anything. So if you even just needed one Bitcoin wallet, then you still want to buy a Mac Mini for that. It's still the
Mm.
best like hardware wallet that you could imagine, right? And then turn them upside down so that the thing on the bottom it looks like the 2018 black circle logo.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Uh, where can people find out more about you and more about your company?
Yeah, just go online and like go onto Twitter and type 2018 in the search thing. You can find all our people.
All
This
right.
was great.
Well, thanks so much, and I had a great time. Bye, everybody.